The revelations are given to the Mormon community as a whole and also to individuals. They are both applicable to the community and very deeply personal. And so we see in documents volumes 1 and 2 how people start to apply these revelations in their lives and some of the struggles that occur as a result of trying to obey the revelations.
In this episode of History of the Saints, we return once again to the Joseph Smith Papers and the newly released second volume of the Documents series. This volume opens up in July of 1831 with Joseph Smith and his brethren in Independence, Missouri. A revelation has just announced that is the gathering place where the city of Zion will be built. The volume goes all the way forward to January of 1833 in Kirtland, where Joseph inaugurates the School of the Prophets. In between, the documents chronicle the history of the church, a church which, by the way, is growing and expanding rapidly. And it shows Joseph Smith's struggles to lead this expanding kingdom and overcome opposition. It was November of 1832, in a letter from Joseph to William W. Phelps, that the prophet Joseph said this: "Brother William, in the love of God, I will proceed to unfold to you some of the feelings of my heart." And that's what this volume does. Teaches the history and unfolds the feelings of the heart of Joseph Smith the prophet.
The second volume in the Documents series is, I think, one of the more exciting volumes in the Joseph Smith Papers. It really covers kind of the evolution and maturation of a church that, by mid-1831 was still really in its infancy. But we see through this time period from July 1831 to January of 1833, really an evolution of leadership in the church, maturation of theology, as well as just kind of seeing Joseph Smith grow into his role as prophet and leader of this church.
These volumes are predominantly revelations, and people have become familiar with them through canonization, but we do have several revelations that were never canonized. And to have these copies of these revelations in the handwriting of the individuals to whom they were addressed, there becomes this intimacy of the directive that is given in those revelations.
Behold, thus saith the Lord, by the voice of the Spirit, it is wisdom in me that my servant John Burke, David Elliott, Erastus Babbitt, should take their journey this fall to the land of Zion.
The volume opens with a revelation given to Joseph on the 20th of July, 1831 in Independence, Missouri, where the Lord finally reveals to the saints the precise location of the city of Zion and the temple that's supposed to be built in Missouri. This was really kind of a key thing for the saints. They'd been promised for many months prior to this that the Lord would reveal the location of the city of Zion, or the New Jerusalem, and I think they were looking with expectation for this to occur.
It goes on to clarify that the place, which is now called Independence in the language of the Revelation, is the center place, and that the place for the temple is lying westward, not far from the courthouse. And Joseph Smith identified exactly where that place was, and now the Latter-day Saints knew where the temple was, where the center place was, what the land of Zion was, and they were commanded to begin purchasing property there.
For the saints at the time, with their mindset, building up the city of Zion was kind of the penultimate event of Christ returning. The city of Zion would be built, the elect would be gathered to Zion, and then once that had occurred, then Jesus Christ would return to the earth for his second advent.
When John Whitman recorded this revelation in the early revelation book that he was keeping for the church, he noted that this was the first revelation received in Missouri. And this had been expected and anticipated for months. And it really goes all the way back to the Book of Mormon.
Zion was not only not a branch, it was the ultimate place. This is where the city of Zion would be built, and everything else were kind of appendages to that city of Zion. So you begin to have the saints building up headquarters in Kirtland, but then you also have this burgeoning community developing in Independence as well. And because of that, Joseph Smith begins to institute some new leadership positions in the church.
We see this development, the evolution of church government structure, and how that evolution was critical to what the saints were experiencing at the time, and how as things progressed with the saints, as they became a larger body of people, how that organizational structure had to change to meet the needs of the membership of the church.
Edward Partridge had been ordained the first bishop of the church back in Kirtland. This new revelation, now known as Doctrine and Covenants, section 57, commanded him, in effect, to plant himself in the land of Missouri.
So here you have the only bishop in the church who is told to move himself and his family to Zion, ostensibly to take a leadership role there and to really help the saints as they're building up Zion, because Joseph wouldn't be there. Joseph would be back in Kirtland.
I think one of the most impressive things that I found about Bishop Partridge was his willingness to keep going, to keep working. Continually he's asked to do things that are uncomfortable for him to do, that he's not intending to do, and yet he answers the call again and again to go to Missouri and then to stay in Missouri when he's not expecting it.
We have to suffer, and shall for some time, many privations here which you and I have not been used to for years. You know, I stand in an important station, and as I am occasionally chastened, I sometimes feel as though I must fall, not to give up the cause, but I fear my station is above what I can perform to the acceptance of my Heavenly Father. I hope you and I may conduct ourselves as at last to land our souls in the haven of eternal rest. Pray for me that I may not fall. Edward Partridge, August 1831, Independence, Missouri.
One of the most impressive things that I found about Bishop Partridge was his willingness to sacrifice and to do things that were very uncomfortable with him, and to defer to a prophet and seer who was much younger than him, and yet to trust in the vision even when he didn't see the full vision himself.
There are in Documents Volume 2 a number of letters, some personal and some are church business. The mail service in 1831 was much different than we know it today.
I was fascinated by the documents that were letters. Joseph wrote a few in his own handwriting, which are in Docs 1 and 2, but mostly he would dictate. Part of our task in dealing with the documents is the letters. And what our research showed was that there were mail routes that were used. We figured out how the postage worked and how the letters were written, and the ink and you know, the whole thing about writing letters is fascinating. We tell that in our docs volumes. But what shocked me was to realize, again, looking at it from young Joseph's point of view, trying to coordinate between Kirtland and Missouri. A letter would take 3 weeks to reach Jackson County. So if Joseph, in charge of the church, wants to find out something about Missouri, 3 weeks the letter goes down. Bishop Partridge or someone else will answer the letter, 3 weeks to go back. 6 weeks to try to coordinate. And then when he gets the answer back, then he has to respond. So it could be 9 weeks before something happens down there in Missouri.
And among those letters in Documents Volume 2 is this one, written by Joseph Smith from New York to his wife Emma back in Kirtland.
While Joseph Smith was staying there, back home, Emma Smith was in the advanced stages of pregnancy. She was about to deliver. And in fact, Joseph Smith would end up arriving home the very day that Joseph Smith III was born, and he just missed it, but he did get there that evening. But he was concerned about Emma Smith. He was concerned about her health and her welfare. And at the close of his letter that he wrote to her from the Pearl Street house, these are his words.
I hope you will excuse me for writing this letter so soon after writing, for I feel as if I wanted to say something to you to comfort you in your peculiar trial and present affliction. I hope God will give you strength that you may not faint. I pray God to soften the hearts of those around you, to be kind to you and take the burden off your shoulders as much as possible and not afflict you. I feel for you, for I know your state and that others do not. But you must comfort yourself, knowing that God is your friend in heaven, and that you have one true and living friend on earth, your husband, Joseph Smith, Jr.
I really like that, just because it shows Joseph as being someone who did love his family deeply, cared tremendously for them, and missed them a great deal when he was apart from them.
Most of Documents Volume 2 is Revelations.
One of the great values of Docs 1 and 2, and this kind of realistic look at history and the beginnings of the church, is that it puts the revelations, the revelation texts, in their historical context. Anybody can pick up the scriptures today and read it and be prompted by their thought or the Spirit of the Lord to see a particular significance or meaning to the text. You don't need any background, you just need a kind of reflective mind, a spiritual sensitivity, and you'll find much treasure. But that does not enable someone to say what that text may have meant in its original context. And that's where Docs 1 and Docs 2 are going to be helpful. Now suddenly, we're going to be able to understand many of those passages in interesting and fresh ways that will seem new to us, but that will actually be close to what was understood when the revelation was first dictated. And so that will enhance in a way that there are few other volumes that provide that kind of insight and window into the past. I hasten to add that I would be remiss if anybody took that information, raced into their family circle, their family home evening, their Sunday school class, and said, "Now I know the true meaning of Revelation X." No, this is not to privilege the past over the present. They're different realms. Again, that's my point about continuing revelation. There was a certain inspired understanding and application of that text 150, 170 years ago that was perfectly suited and tailored for those people at that time. Let us see it, view it, gaze at it, and cherish it.
By November 1831, a number of revelations had been received, and as members of the church wanted copies of those revelations, a conference was held.
And there are enough members of the church who want to have these revelations that they would benefit from them, and so the discussion took place, and they finally agreed as a council that it was the will of the Lord that they should print the revelations. Joseph Smith wanted to have a statement from these brethren, just as he did from the 3 and 8 witnesses for the Book of Mormon. We have found a document. It's in the Book of Commandments and Revelations, and it says, "A revelation," and it is the testimony of the witnesses to the Book of Commandments. This testimony then was received by revelation from the prophet Joseph Smith, and the intent was to have those brethren present to sign it.
We, the undersigners, feel willing to bear testimony to all the world of mankind, to every creature upon the face of the earth, upon the isles of the sea, that God hath borne record to our souls through the Holy Ghost shed forth upon us, that these commandments are given by inspiration of God, and are profitable for all men, and are verily true. We give this testimony unto the world, the Lord being our helper.
When the Book of Commandments and Revelations was taken by Oliver Cowdery and John Whitmer to Missouri to print the Book of Commandments, when they met with the leaders of the church in Missouri, the book was opened and they start adding names of men who were in Missouri as witnesses to the Book of Commandments.
My favorite name that signed it is Levi Hancock. Levi Hancock was an early Latter-day Saint. He actually was related to John Hancock, the famous signer of the Declaration of Independence that was very vigorous and large in his signing of his name. So I think it's interesting that some gene in the Hancock family forced them to make statements by signing their name. Levi Hancock, when he signed his name, he added after his name, "never to be erased."
It was not just revelations and letters that made a significant impact on the history of the church. There were newspapers as well.
In June of 1832, the church established a newspaper called the Evening and the Morning Star. This was the first newspaper that the church established, and it was in Independence, Missouri. So it was one of the first newspapers in the western frontier, and certainly the first newspaper there in Independence. I don't know that many members today realize the importance that the church played in early American history. They really were pioneers in Missouri. And this newspaper, the Evening and the Morning Star, they had grand expectations. It was a very large sheet, a very big newspaper. And they printed various matters relating to the church. They had histories, they had letters from missionaries, they had news about goings-on of the church. But most importantly, they printed the revelations that Joseph Smith received. And I think it's fitting and telling that the very first page of the very first issue of the Evening and the Morning Star contained a revelation given to Joseph Smith. It, to me, symbolizes the power and the importance that the early saints had on these revelations.
Many significant revelations were received between July of 1831 and January of 1833. Revelations in today's Doctrine and Covenants such as Section 57, 68, 84, 88, and one that would forever change the Latter-day Saints' concept of the next life, Doctrine and Covenants, Section 76, or as it was known simply at the time, the Vision.
And as Joseph says, as he relates this in a later history, this information comes because Joseph and Sidney Rigdon are working on their translation of the Bible, and they come to the passage in John chapter 5, verse 29 that talks about many mansions in the Father's kingdom. And they wonder about that. What does that mean, many mansions? And so they go to the Lord with that question, and as they're pondering on this, that's when they say that this vision of the afterlife is opened up to them. And they see that after this life is concluded, everyone except those who follow Satan, who the Revelation terms sons of perdition, would receive a kingdom of glory in the afterlife, either the celestial kingdom, the terrestrial kingdom, or the telestial kingdom. One of the interesting things about this is that you have kind of two different reactions to the vision. You have some church members that really kind of get a little bit disturbed because they come from traditional Protestant backgrounds that after this life there's a heaven and there's a hell, and that's it. So you kind of have that extreme, but then you have another extreme where there are people who just glory in this new knowledge and think, this is incredible.
At another conference on December 27, 1832, a group of high priests met with the prophet Joseph at the Whitney store. They came together to talk about the building up of Zion.
And as they pray to the Lord about this, section 88 is revealed to Joseph Smith. And this is the section that talks about building a temple, not only in Jackson County where the saints had already been told to build a temple, but also in Kirtland. And it also tells the saints to establish a school of learning, a school of the prophets, where those elders and high priests who are going to be sent out to preach the gospel will come and they will be instructed in spiritual things, in temporal things. They will receive the knowledge that they need to really go out and be effective as missionaries. It's section 88 that tells the saints to establish that school. So again, this is something that really has a transformative impact on the saints. The saints in Kirtland begin to develop the temple at this time.
Joseph Smith receives a revelation that promises them 5 years in Kirtland. that they'll have 5 years of safety or security or of the ability to stay in Kirtland. And it seems that if I read that correctly, that it is allowing them a period of time to get this temple constructed and completed, and that's the reason for being in Kirtland. Once they've finished the temple and received what they need to receive from that temple, then they can move on, which ends up being the case. The temple is partly used as a school to get education, but they can do that anywhere. What they seem to need is a special place to receive specific things, including a restoration of priesthood keys, including allowing Jesus Christ to appear in person in a different way than he might otherwise, because some people have seen him in other contexts in Kirtland, but not apparently in the way that he appears here in the Kirtland temple. So the temple seems primarily designed for that purpose, to be a place where Joseph can receive these priesthood keys.
History comes from documents. And with the release of this new volume, Documents Volume 2, the history of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and of the prophet Joseph Smith stands more accessible and one step closer to completion. And there will be more volumes to come. I'm Glenn Rawson, and we'll see you soon.